Stanford University.
Today's class is on the future of medicine. We have a fantastic set of panelists with us today. All of them are doctors in various different forms. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Dr. Mildred, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yep. I am Mildred Cho. I am not that kind of a doctor. I'm a PhD in biology. I originally did work in laboratory sciences, primarily in developmental biology, and did my PhD here at Stanford. And then I moved into health policy and bioethics, and I'm now the Associate Director of the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics.
Great, thank you. Dr. Timms, do you want to go next? And by the way, I think all of our doctors, you do not want to trust them with medical advice, but they are all PhDs, so.
Sure, I'll go ahead. My name is Tim Mills. I started my career as the director of the Artificial Heart Program at the UCI Medical Center in Irvine, where we developed a whole host of different mechanical assist devices. And that was really kind of a unique time for me, where I had planned to be in academics for my career. I was fortunate enough to get an early role at the medical center in Irvine. And what I learned through being part of the cardiac transplant team and having to put patients on artificial devices was that there was much more that I thought I could do as a scientist to develop new technologies, to develop new medicines than I could working in a medical center. And I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity. I first went to a startup company called Target Therapeutics, where we pioneered a way to treat cerebral aneurysms using a non-surgical approach, at least non-craniotomy approach. We would place a tiny little coil up through the femoral artery into the aneurysm and then do some sort of black magic with some voltage and current to allow that little device to start to coagulate blood in the aneurysm itself. And Target Therapeutics was one of the early, I would say, medical device successes. I went on after we took the company public. We then sold it to Boston Scientific, and I went on from there into a role with the venture capital firm, Sanderling Ventures. We have, since I arrived there, raised over $1 billion of capital, have started over 90 to 100 companies. And I really think I've been able to fulfill what I hoped to do when I left the medical center in Irvine, was to really build an armamentarium that allows physicians and healthcare workers to treat diseases that continue to grow.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Dick La Vie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dick La Vie. I've been in the healthcare industry in various roles for 52 years. I'm retired chairman and CEO of Varian Medical Systems, which is about a $3.5 billion company in cancer equipment. I've been on a lot of medical provider boards, chairman of the Sutter board a few years ago. I'm still on the Sutter Health board. I'm chairman of the board of the School of Public Health in Berkeley, and I'm chairman of the Markla Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University, looking into medical ethics as well as business ethics.
Thank you all. I'm excited for all three of you to share your perspectives today, especially since with the combined experience being able to span academia, research, as well as the public sector, private sector, venture capital, running startups, running companies that have gone public. So I think today will be a very, very rich discussion. Wanted to start off with the question of really diving into what do you view as the biggest problems in healthcare today? And maybe, Dick, do you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, there's pretty unanimous agreement on what those problems are. They're typically in cost, quality, and access. The cost of healthcare, particularly in the United States, has been going up 2 to 5 times the rate of inflation for the last 20 years. And this is a non-sustainable trend. Patients are going bankrupt, or patients are having to bypass treatment because they can't afford it. Hospitals are seeing their revenues go up much slower than their costs. And again, that has a huge impact on what they can do, on whether they can remain solvent. Their reaction is either to withhold services or raise prices to make them very, very expensive, which increases the vicious cycle. So the cost is a very, very serious problem, both for the economy and for healthcare. On the economy level, Medicare just can't continue to sustain the increased cost that we're seeing in healthcare, especially now with the added burden of the COVID virus. Access, partially because of cost, is very limited. We probably have the worst access to healthcare in the developed countries. 20 to 30 million people in this country are not insured. Of the people, we have the lowest rate of physicians per capita of any country in the developed world. So people, even if they have health insurance, may not be able to find a primary care physician. There aren't nearly enough primary care physicians, and may have to wait 3 to 6 to 9 months for a 10-minute appointment with a specialist. We are that stretched for access. And this access is both a financial problem, a health problem, and an ethical problem, because it hits the poor people and the people who live in certain areas a lot harder than the wealthier people. So the differentiation, the disequity in the healthcare system is something that we cannot be proud of. And again, the trend in this direction has been getting worse every year. As the costs go up, the access gets more polarized every year. And then finally, there's the issue of quality. Now, I'm not sure how you should define quality, but quality is partially a function of cost and access and availability of treatment. But there are also a lot of statistics on quality, and I've looked up 2 surveys of quality, one by the World Health Organization and one by the Commonwealth Club. And they look at things like infant mortality, they look at life expectancy, they look at percentage of people that get vaccinations. They look at unnecessary deaths due to errors or due to lack of finding the right treatment for the right disease. They look at mortality due to various diseases, etc. The Commonwealth Fund surveyed 11 countries, all in the Western world, and the US ranked dead last in the survey. Ranked at first in some of the categories and last in some of the categories, but below average in most of the categories. So in 11 categories, we ranked 11th. And in the World Health Organization, they looked at, I think, 190 countries. And we ranked 37th in the survey done in 2020. Now, you can take all that with a grain of salt because there's a lot of opinions. Some people think we have the best healthcare system in the world. But 2 organizations that have looked at this in great detail have said our quality is not sufficient, especially since we have the most money devoted to healthcare. We spend the most money on R&D for healthcare. We have the best hospitals, the best trained doctors. There is no excuse for having the quality as it is. So I'm hoping as we have this discussion together, we can get on the trend of talking about what should we be doing that we're not doing in technology development to improve the quality and the access and the cost. Let me tell you how we are spending our money. We spend $200 billion a year on healthcare research in this country, $200 billion. 97% of that is spent in 3 areas. One is on drug development. One is on device development, technology, MRIs, and the kind of things Tim talked about. A lot of money goes into that, and it's been very effective. And one is on long-term research, basic research. And that includes things like genomics, epigenetics, stem cell research, proteomics, the microbiome, artificial intelligence, immunotherapy. Very, very good, elegant basic research. Unfortunately, in a lot of that research that's going on, it actually increases costs and decreases accessibility to healthcare, and the 2 go together. And so 97% is spent on areas that are not helping to solve the biggest problems we have in healthcare. 3% is being spent on that, and what I'm hoping is that we can talk about that 3%. Some of that 3% is being spent, incidentally, on solving the epidemic that we're in right now. And I think that we can all agree that we weren't well prepared for that epidemic. 3% is not enough to spend on something like that. But anyway, I'm hoping the discussion will focus on more on the 3% than on the 97%.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are similar to Dick's. I think that realistically, we know we have problems and we have different levels of problems and different ways to identify them. But I think one of the things that we're going to have to wrestle with as far as the future of medicine is that outcomes do matter. And there is already a push by some large companies who are basically self-insuring all of their employees to make sure that their employees are going to the best centers for the procedures and the therapies that they need to have done. And I think this will become a theme, because the reason why the companies are doing it is because they believe that outcomes do matter, and that by going to the best place, that ultimately the cost of that disease or the cost of that therapy will be the lowest, because the outcomes will be better. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that. And I think it's a good thing. I think we'll see that some medical centers that try to be everything to everyone might very well be better served to do things that are more limited, that they can do very, very well, and thus at a cheaper price. And so I think that's kind of the way that I look at one of the potential activities that are going on as we move forward. I think the other thing is that, going back to the title of the course here, we're in a unique time where we have, and this wasn't the case 10 years ago, where we have now a convergence of, I guess you would call it the digital, the physical, and the biological worlds. And as those merge together, they're not only just changing the way we order our shoes, right? They're changing the way we think about our medicine. And this has really, I think, opened up a disruptive force that I think will be very good going forward to really change the way medicine is practiced, change the way we reach out to our practitioners, change the way we are maybe even treated. And I think in that, I think there'll be sort of two, I think we're seeing already. I'm not really hypothesizing, I'm just kind of stating what I see happening around me. I think there's two areas. I think we're going to continue to have really scientific innovation. Will continue to drive lower cost healthcare because we'll be targeting it to do that. And I think the other thing we'll see is we'll see system reform. If you think about what has happened most recently, go back about 18 months, we had Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan, kind of an unlikely trio of people who have a combined market cap of almost $1.5 trillion. And they said that we're going to create a disruptive healthcare company. It's called Haven Healthcare. And what the first attempt to do there is to really change the way that medical insurance is doled out, right? How the money is spent, where it's spent. And they have this large group of employees that are needy patients. And I think that to me was sort of a milestone of something very different was happening. I think the other thing that we've seen in that same time frame is Google has spun out Varian Life Science. We've seen a lot of very interesting technologies that they have, but it is all being driven to how can we expand healthcare to a broader audience, and how can we do it more cheaply, maintaining the highest outcome possible. And I think this has continued. This past 18 to maybe 24 months, we've also seen, one of the biggest bugaboos, you talk to anybody, and I'm sure Dick probably feels the same way because of his time within the healthcare system, is that electronic medical records, while that was supposed to be a time saver for all the physicians, if you talk to any physician, it is almost universally their number one bugaboo. And so what did we see most recently happen? We saw Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, and Salesforce. Just think of that likely trio, or not trio, the group of companies. Would you imagine that 10 years ago, those sort of dissimilar companies would have even gotten together to work on any project, let alone healthcare? And so they're putting together a standard. It's called FHIR. It stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And the whole idea here is to accelerate adopting a common set of standards for exchanging healthcare information. And so I think that we're really at a unique time here. And I think the title of this course for me was more to try to shed light on where we are going, and clearly being driven by the things that Dick talked about as the reasons why we want to go to that place in a different way.
I think that was well said. Tying that back to specifically in terms of, I think Dick did a great job in summarizing the biggest problems in healthcare today, really focusing on cost, access, and quality. Just the concept of biohackers, would love to get your thoughts on that. These are people who are not necessarily trained in science. They're going outside the channels. They're trying to create solutions that are not necessarily available or affordable, at least yet. Wanted to get your thoughts in terms of biohackers in general, and why are we seeing this shift, especially since it's a community of, some might argue, just amateur researchers without the academic background, but are doing good in some ways.
Well, I think that the whole concept of biohacker probably makes it sound like it's unique and it's never happened before, and this is uniquely going on now, which maybe for the biological world is true. But I think it will likely, is when we look back on this 10 to 20 years from now, I think that group of individuals may be responsible for some of the biggest changes that we're going to see. And the reason why I say that is if you look at other industries, if you look at the semiconductor industry, I mean, how did we get to where we are today? Why is it that we can stare into this little black box and we can talk to each other even though we're thousands of miles apart? It happened because of the integrated circuit technology. It happened because one day, a long time ago, transistors were invented. And the transistor wasn't enough to get us to where we are today. But what happened in the 70s was a very interesting discovery or work that led to a discovery. And that was the creation of a simulation program called SPICE. And SPICE was developed at UC Berkeley. The acronym stands for Simultaneous Program with Integrated Circuit Emphasis. And what it allowed for was to, instead of having to take individual transistors or unique packages of transistors and breadboard them together in some sort of crude representation of what the actual circuit needed to be, instead of having to do that, you could actually run a simulation. And the reason why the simulation was so much more accurate was because it took into account all kinds of things, not just the mobility of the electrons and holes within the semiconductor material, but it also took into account all the unwanted parasitic conditions of parasitic resistance, parasitic capacitors, and it allowed for a way that engineers could quickly simulate what, in a day, what would have taken them months to do in the past. And I kind of see this as similar to what we need to have in medicine. Going forward, we need a biospice. And in fact, some of the biohacking work that's going on, linking with some of the AI discoveries, may be that simulator. We should be able to have a simulator that looks at drug development and has simulating properties that allows us to look at not in dosing people. Think of dosing people as like building the circuit on a breadboard. What we want is we want a simulator where we can simulate all the off-target effects, the side effects, and at the same time understand if this drug combination is going to lead to hopefully a cure to what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And I don't use that word lightly. The word cure, again, needs to be part of our genre going forward. The idea of treating disease in a chronic manner should be a fallback condition. The goal should be to treat for a cure. And so I think the term that you use, biohacker, I think we have a lot of history in other industries. And I just highlighted one that came to mind for me with the SPICE program. But I think a simulator that comes out of that will be able to change healthcare for the better and address the concerns that Dick has in our current situation by making drug development cheaper and better and eventually lead to more armamentarium that is truly cost effective for patients.
Ernestine, can I just build on what Tim just said?
Go ahead.
He started with the problems with the EHR, and it's true, no doctors like the electronic health record. In a typical hospital system, like the Sutter system where I was on the board, I have been on the board, there's 110 different databases, most of which do not talk to each other in a seamless fashion. Most patients don't stay in one hospital or with one doctor. They go to multiple doctors, multiple hospitals throughout their life. It's horrendously complex. There is no way to put all these data together in a patient-centric way. They're built around specialties or around hospitals or around doctor groups or whatever. And that is not going to be solved by the traditional industry, by Epic and Cerner and companies like that. They're too heavily invested in what they've already done. It's going to take a new approach, and it might be biohackers. It might be people who operate in the cloud like Google and others that can do this better than others. But we're spending an immense amount of money on a system which is actually holding us up. It's raising costs, it's raising complexity, and it's not solving the patient-centric problem. It's very, very specialized around other things than patients. So I think one of the big opportunities in healthcare, as we talk about technology, this is a technology problem. How do you get from where we are to now, where most hospitals have Epic systems or Cerner systems or what have you? How do you get from there to the kind of data seamlessness that we absolutely need? And we don't have a solution to that. And I would love to see us be spending more R&D money on that solution than some of the things we are spending it on. And I'm not disagreeing that we shouldn't be working on the 97% that we have been working on. All I'm saying is that we don't have time to continue to do that and only spend 3% on solving the real problems. And there are low cost, low tech approaches to solving those real problems, which we have to address much more quickly than we are today.
Yeah, and I'd like to address that point, just building on that in terms of the biohacker phenomena you mentioned, Ernestine, because I think there's several different sort of streams of things that are related to, I think, this phenomenon of biohacking. There's sort of a DIY bio community. There's people who are interested in improving the human race, which is kind of controversial, but interested in using technology and not innovative ways to do that. And then there are people who have medical problems that they see are unresolved or unaddressed by the systems that we have put in place for research and medical care. And I think that is sort of spurring a kind of class of activity that some people call citizen science. And that is coming together with a kind of 20 or 30-year trend and movement that we now call patient advocacy. And I think sort of first arose in the 80s in the United States in a strong way with the AIDS movement and breast cancer and so forth, where patients saw that their medical needs were being unaddressed by research. And that has kind of moved into rare diseases and other groups where they also feel like their needs are not being addressed by the systems we have in place that kind of prioritize the ability to make money and all sorts of other things. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of different kinds of activities that are similar to biohacking, which is sort of people outside the professional research realm trying to move into that space. And actually there are a fair number of people who are professional scientists who are also occupying that space because they sort of see the regulatory systems and also the kind of reward systems we have in place for research and commercialization and translation of research as not really meeting their needs to kind of push forward the ideas that they have. We also have intellectual property issues to contend with. So I think there's a sort of a kind of a lot of different lines moving in the same direction to kind of that have kind of led us to this place where people who have not traditionally been trained as researchers or live in the biomedical world are trying to, basically come up with cures for their own children or develop drugs that can be produced without infringing on intellectual property laws that prevent them from getting access to things like insulin. So I kind of see it as sort of this, it's sort of an insurgency in a way. And I think it's in response to kind of perceived inadequacies in sort of the overall systems that we have in place.
Mm-hmm. So Mildred, natural follow-up for you, since your research does focus a lot on the ethics of medicine with these new developments and this movement that you described, should we be worried about unintended consequences that might arise from this?
Well, I think there's always unintended consequences that arise from research and technology development. And I think we should be attentive to that. But I also think that we've seen examples of ways in which we should be and need to be attentive to research that is done, for example, in the tech sector when it's applied to medicine, but by people who are not clinicians. So for example, I've been talking to a lot of people who are working on these COVID related contact tracing apps. And, you've probably seen that Apple and Google are partnering to develop apps on people's phones that could be used to notify you if you are within, sort of Bluetooth range of someone else who's been identified or who identifies themselves as having been infected with coronavirus. So I think that's a major public health need. But I do think that in order to really target the application of the platforms that Google and Apple and other companies can make available for these public health needs in an ethical way and also in an effective way that actually works to do contact tracing, because there are huge limitations to using smartphones to do contact tracing that I don't feel that people are really talking about. And I'm not sure that the people in the tech sector who are developing these platforms really are collaborating enough with people in the clinical and public health and epidemiology worlds to understand the limitations of sort of using these kinds of technological platforms for medical and public health purposes. I think what we should be concerned about is that the right people be in the room together to talk about how these things should be developed. That includes sort of a wide range of stakeholders. And I think that's what when we were talking about biohacking, that this phenomena like biohacking arise when key stakeholders get left out of decisions and priority setting for research and technology. And so just one example of the kind of thing that I think app developers would need to have a better understanding of, that they probably can't get unless they reach out past their sort of comfort zone and talk more directly with epidemiologists and others, is that there's sort of an assumption that if you get these apps in the hands of a lot of people, they'll just work, right? But there's thinking that in order for this sort of app-based contact tracing to work, it really won't be effective unless at least 60, maybe even 70% of people in a geographic area all have these apps working. And we know that there are some areas where less than 50% of people have smartphones. So I think there's a lot of assumptions going on the part of companies that they need to really be more critical about when they're developing these kinds of technological solutions to biomedical problems, so they can understand really what the nature of the problem is and what the limitations of the technology are that have to be overcome.
Can I just add something? I came within a whisker of joining the board of Therapeutics, and I got to know them very, very well. And that's sort of a case of a biohacker mentality. They were going to replace all of the standard ways things are done with a lower cost, faster, more convenient way of doing things. It would have solved cost, quality, and access all at once. And it was a great idea, but they couldn't implement it. At the same time, there are probably, and Tim would know about this, there are probably hundreds of companies out there doing similar type things. You could call that biohacking, because they're coming up with ways that will replace the standard way we do things, cheaper and more accessible, and giving satisfactory quality all at once. And they're not in the standard system. They're not in the 97% of the money that we spend in R&D. They're spending their own money. They're getting it from venture capitalists or whatever. And there's a lot of promise there. And it's a growing industry, largely centered in the Bay Area. So if you categorize that as biohackers, that's good stuff. That's stuff that is really going to help everybody. And I think it's the right direction that we have to be going if we're going to make changes in a really fast and efficient way. Tim could comment on this probably better than I could, because he knows who's investing money in what.
Yeah, yeah, Dick, I agree completely with you. And I think, what we see a lot of this, and I think it's healthy. we sort of have a different term for it. We call it unlikely partnerships, because these are people that are unlikely to be in medicine, but they've got a great idea and they're going to run with it. And we encourage them to build teams, exactly what Mildred talked about. Get the complementary expertise that you need and give it a shot. And if you can convince us to fund you or others like us, then you've got a shot of really doing something groundbreaking. And I think we're going to see some of this. I mean, I can't really sort of explain how surprised we were as a partnership when we saw this whole creation of FIRE, this notion that Alphabet, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, and Salesforce could come together. If that group can come together to work on something that's this important, then certainly we're going to be supportive for individual entrepreneurs who've got great ideas and try to hook them up with the right people at Stanford and Berkeley and take a swing at it, because we think this is money well spent that could really revolutionize and in a positive disruption way to make medicine better for the future.
I'd like to focus our attention on some of these emerging trends and breakthroughs in medicine. Specifically, the MIT Technology Review released its annual list of 10 advances that they believe will make a real difference in solving important problems. And 3 of those include medicine, ranging from anti-aging drugs to AI-discovered molecules, and also hyper-personalized medicine, such as CRISPR. Do you think we should be focusing our time and efforts on these, or are there other medical breakthroughs that you think they did miss on that list? Any other advancements that you find extremely promising?
I mean, this is the point that I was trying to make. We are spending a lot of resources on these things, and it's all good stuff. You can't deny that something good will eventually come out of CRISPR and stem cell research and all these things that we're working on. No question of that. What I'm questioning is the fact that we are underpaying for the things more closely related to public health that affect access and cost. And we see it with the coronavirus. We just were not ready for that. We have some of the greatest minds in the world who are now going to focus their attention on that rather than on something else. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't stop doing all these very good basic research things. We have to do them. And as Tim said, they are improving outcomes. There's no question. I've been in the cancer business for 50 years. And 50 years ago, the 5-year survival for cancer was 39%. Now it's closer to 69%. That's a heck of an improvement. And same kind of thing has happened with heart disease. So we are making progress with better outcomes. But these better outcomes are not available to the large percentage of the population because of the cost and the access problems. And we have to solve, and that's low-hanging fruit. We can solve that with technology, with biohackers, with some kind of new companies, with better software systems that bring everything together, with better informatics. I don't know if you're aware of this, but we waste 30 to 50% of everything we do in healthcare on unnecessary and inappropriate procedures. Total waste. And there's all kinds of data presented by a lot of different places. We have the data to stop that. We have the data to add some rationale to that. The data all exist, but it's not collaborative, it's not coordinated, and nobody can access the data in a form that causes them to change. We could save $1 trillion a year just by using the information we have today in a more effective manner. And that's a technological problem, but it's not rocket science. It's something that we can solve, and we can solve a lot more quickly than developing an improvement in life expectancy of 10 years. That's going to take a while. We can solve the other problems much more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I totally agree with that, because I think that what people sort of forget in the technology development sort of pathway is that, there's sort of a long road from the development of something like CRISPR as a laboratory concept to actually getting it to be applied and useful in a clinical setting. And that, I'm sure you folks know this in venture capital way better, and people talk about the valley of death and all that sort of stuff, but actually getting something to where it's actually being used is accessible and works. That's a whole different kind of research, right? I mean, that's like health services research and things that look at the delivery of healthcare and how do things integrate with workflow and the kinds of systems that we have set up to bring the healthcare to people. And then also, the technology is not in a vacuum. It's really, I think Dick had a lot of sort of scary statistics about where things are going wrong. But, another one that a lot of people don't realize is that in some places, half of prescriptions that get written don't get filled because people can't afford it. So it doesn't matter if you have a great technology if people just don't use it, right? So, there's this huge gap right at the point of patient care that needs to be addressed. And part of that can be addressed when people are designing technology. If people knew when they were designing their technological systems and had that in mind, that there's this huge gap at the end that you really need to have it be affordable. People need to be able to understand how to use it. It needs to be acceptable to people, both, the clinical folks and the patients. And there's all these sort of social barriers to use of technologies and sort of thing. Those are all things that can and should be taken into account at the very beginnings of designing technology, as well as things like the intellectual property that I mentioned before. So I remember in the early days of gene discovery, when some folks discovered the gene for cystic fibrosis, they made a very conscious effort to patent it, but patent it with the intent of being able to have control for making it available as widely as possible. Mm-hmm. So using the patent in a flipped manner. So not to prevent other people from using it, but to encourage and be able to control how it was widely disseminated. So those are all things that people at the development side can be doing and thinking about. Because I think, when I hear about people talking about CRISPR, absolutely agree. It could be quite game changing, but I'm old enough to have been around when people were talking about this for human gene therapy in the late 80s. And it took 30 years for a gene therapy to be approved by the FDA. And those first few gene therapies that have been approved all cost at least $1 million. And they're mostly for fairly rare diseases right now. And most of the people that have those rare diseases cannot afford them. So again, the technology should not just be considered in a vacuum in terms of how it works or whether it works in sort of narrow controlled situations, but in terms of the whole social framework in which it's being deployed.
Mm-hmm. Right. I understand and agree with the perspective that we are spending billions of dollars on this R&D technology that's more focused on long-range solutions, but we have a lot of short-term problems that are still unmet. I guess question for you, Tim, is at the end of the day, solutions like anti-aging, if we could solve it, is definitely a way to look at a problem and a condition from a different perspective. What are your thoughts in terms of these different ways to solve our problems and our needs? Like, should we still be spending time on that, or are there certain breakthroughs that we should be focusing on, or recent advancements that you find promising?
Well, I agree with Mildred and Dick. You need to prioritize and you need to be able to budget your resources so that you can address let's just call it the low-hanging fruit, as well as some of the future discoveries. And I think that anti-aging drugs are just, as you said, just another way to look at a disease situation. And so do I think that this is all about just living longer? I don't. I think there could be some discoveries in that where we learn ways to treat chronic diseases that can be, again, curative, or in a way to not just prolong life, but prolong quality of life. But I don't think you do that. You don't fund that in exclusion of everything else. You have to find a way that you can make that fit. The whole AI discovery of molecules, I think, is very exciting. I think that will almost fund itself through, let's call it, these unlikely partnerships or the biohackers. If you remember, probably something I didn't talk about, the SPICE model. When the SPICE model was written, the simulating program was written at Berkeley, it was written on Fortran and was put into an open source agreement. So going back to sort of Mildred's comment, I think that's as important today as it was back in the 70s. We need some tools, we need some cutting edge tools, that fall into open domain so that people can use this, so they can become ways to make more productive, cheaper, better medicines. And I think the whole hyper-personalized medicine using CRISPR, I mean, CRISPR gets a bad name a lot. And, I think some of that is warranted. But there are also some very interesting things that are going on using CRISPR. One of our companies, we're using CRISPR to try to take human islet cells for the treatment of diabetes and be able to alter the islet cell enough so that it retains its ability to sense and excrete insulin, but doesn't show up as a foreign body within the host that it could be injected into. And that is, if you think about it, that is an opportunity that dwarfs many of the other disease states in the world. If you could somehow allow these cells to be placed into a patient with type 1 diabetes and have them become resident in the patient without triggering an immune response, you now have cured diabetes. You no longer have to have insulin shots. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we should challenge our research dollars to be doing. And I agree that some of the gene therapy ideas are, can be singled out and you can make it look like it is going down a path for only the elite individuals in the country. But I would take a slightly different view of that, mainly because of the work that we've been doing. So I think there's a place for all of this. I just think you have to be able to budget it accordingly. And we need what I think is, I'll call it political leadership, to be able to guide some of these activities, almost the way that President Kennedy made a proclamation that we would put a man on the moon. Somebody has to step up and say, we're going to allow BARDA to develop the following, and you name it, whatever you want that to be. But there needs to be some guidance, and there needs to be a commitment of these things that aren't used as political footballs every 4 years when we have people trying to get elected. And this, I think, is fundamental. The work that's going on right now with the coronavirus crisis is an example of how we have these mechanisms and organizations in place. And to BARDA's credit, they are funding Moderna, which is a company that had been working on an RNA vaccine to treat SARS-1. Fortunately, that group was held intact and has been working on that vaccine with BARDA's support, with the NIH's support for the past 7 years. And that may just result in a vaccine that's ready to go in the fall. But if you think about it, that kind of happened by accident. And accident is probably the wrong word. But there was nobody saying, we have to develop this, we have to develop that, because we're going to make it a national priority. And I think that's where we need to go and be able to do that in the future. And that's certainly going to be part of the future of medicine, whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm. I agree with the accessibility and cost points brought up, but the innovation that comes out of the US continues to be remarkable. Our private system spurs more innovation than any other similar systems. How should the US improve access while maintaining its leadership in innovation? And to add to that question, I think it'd be interesting to hear from you in terms of specifically accessibility when it comes to chronic care as opposed to more episodic care.
Chronic care is becoming the biggest cost issue in the country. As the population gets older, typical people who are over 60 have anywhere between 2 and 5 chronic diseases: cancer, arthritis, pulmonary diseases, diabetes, et cetera. It goes on and on. And our system has been set up historically for episodic care. We are very, very good, probably the best in the world at treating an episode of care. Our surgery is very good. Our cancer treatments are very good. Our heart treatments are very good. But we don't track patients with chronic diseases after that initial treatment. And, I grew up in the cancer world. My company made cancer equipment. And I know that our treatments were exceptionally good. And that's why the 5-year survival went from 39% to 69%. But those patients, that cost of that treatment is about $100,000 a year. Those patients live another 7 to 10 years on the average. And the cost of the follow-up on those patients is $50,000 per year. That's not handled by the people that do the treatment. That's a different world altogether. They may go to a different city, different doctors, different specialists, et cetera. And we don't have a good way to manage chronic care as we do to manage episodic care. And if you look at the cost data, most of the cost in our healthcare system is due to chronic diseases. And probably it falls in the same category of waste. A lot of it is not necessary or is inappropriate. One of the areas that we get marked down in the surveys by WHO is that we have many, many more visits to the emergency room, unnecessary visits to the emergency room, as any other country. Typically, for cancer treatment, 50% of the patients who are treated with chemotherapy end up going to the emergency room within 6 months. That is preventable. That's very preventable. Yet we don't work on that kind of thing. And the cost saving in doing that for chronic diseases is immense. We're doing a good job on curing acute cases. We do a wonderful job on acute cases. We don't do a very good job on chronic diseases, and we need to.
Tim, Mildred, was there something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess one other thing I'll add is that I think we do have a very good system for at the basic research end of things. And I do think it's a shame that some of the things that are the result of innovation in the United States are some things that American citizens actually can't avail themselves of because of sort of larger systems issues like who can negotiate prices for drugs, for example. So in other countries, they can negotiate prices on behalf of their entire country because they have unified systems that have enormous leverage for purchasing drugs. So they can get the same drug that we could be paying 10 times the amount for the same drug as some people in other countries, regardless of where that was developed. So even if it was developed in our country, we may have to pay much more than people in other countries for that exact same drug. So that's not really a technology issue, that's sort of a systems issue. But I think that there is a lot of innovation that's going on, and where we drop the ball is not really at those kinds of, I think our systems for research really reward individual innovators, and we kind of have taken the, let 1,000 flowers bloom approach to that, and our systems are better than other countries in terms of kind of being less hierarchical and letting ideas come from unconventional places and letting them sort of fight for survival in a kind of Darwinian way. But I think we have a lot of innovators and a lot of opportunities for innovation. But I think where we do drop the ball is sort of later in getting those things into practice.
Again, I think all really good points. I think I'm more optimistic, though, in some of these, I'll call it tech activities. If you look at what Facebook is doing, they have an app or a program called Preventive Health. And Preventive Health, I think, speaks to some of what both Mildred and Dick have been talking about. But Preventive Health is sort of the first rollout of Facebook's immense amount of followers. I mean, they alone show up on almost everyone's desktop, at least in the US and other parts of the world. So they have a giant following. And what Preventive Health, I will probably overly simplify it, but what it helps you do as an individual is to be on top of just your preventive health management. And I think that at some level, if you have 1 billion people that are using an app that gives you some insight into how you should be checking on yourself as you move through your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, this group will become very powerful in the types of expectations they will have, the types of therapies, the types of follow-up that they want to have. And I think this is a real example of system reform. just because of the sheer mass of the way this data can be organized and the people behind it. And so I am optimistic that this is a cultural change. This can be a cultural change if this and other programs and applications become available to the general public across the globe. And this could be that catalyst that says to developers, this is a group that needs to be taken care of. This is a group that's meaningful, and help us restructure some of the expectations and the motivations of how we move forward to provide better healthcare with better outcomes for less money.
I agree. And there's even an example of this right at Stanford. There's a program called Personalized Health as opposed to Personalized Medicine. And it's run by Sam Gambier, who's a good friend and a neighbor of mine. And what they're doing, they have a $10 billion program, which is collaboration with Duke and with Google, to start monitoring people at any age and monitor, I don't know how many different biomedical indicators, and have them in for blood tests and all kinds of examinations every year. And just to collect data and then see what transpires in their health later in life, and see if there's a correlation between what they monitored 10 years ago and what happens today, which is really exactly what Tim is talking about. It's an organized program. And I think it's one of the best things we're doing as far as technology. It's not getting a lot of publicity, but I think for a long-term solution, this is the kind of thing we need to be doing. The good news is we are doing it. There's smart people working on these things. And this is different from what the government is supporting in the national labs and that sort of thing. It's probably more important. So I'm also optimistic. You know, I come across as pessimistic when I say we're only spending 3% on the things we should be spending it on. 3% is still $6 billion. That's not bad. But I think that could be increased a little bit, maybe at the expense of some of the other things we're doing. And let me give one particular example of where I think there's waste. And I'm going to gore somebody's bull in this case. I once had a conversation with Zeke Emanuel when he was the deputy head of the National Cancer Institute. And the National Cancer Institute does a lot of work on biomedical, on chemistry, on chemotherapy. And I said, look, 63% of cancer patients, 65% of cancer patients get radiation therapy. Why aren't you working on radiation therapy as well as chemotherapy? And his answer was, because that's what we do. We are biological, molecule-driven people. And that's not the reason to be doing research. The reason to be doing research is to solve a specific problem. If they would take a little bit of the money they're spending on drugs and spend it on other ways to deal with cancer, it would solve more problems than they're doing by just working on drugs. And that's the only point I'm making. I think we prioritize a little bit wrong because it's what people want to work on rather than it's addressing a specific problem. I think Mildred said something about this. People are driven by being able to publish papers and get advancements in technology world, et cetera. And we need people who are driven by solving real world problems. That will change some of the research we do.
I want to conclude with just one final question. In 2 to 3 sentences, could you each describe how you think COVID-19 will affect the future of medicine?
Okay. I'll take a stab at that. I hope that it increases the value and demystifies vaccine therapies. I think it's very unfortunate that we have such a counterculture that's against vaccine therapies when the data for vaccine therapies is so positive. And so I am optimistic that we are successful in coming up with a vaccine in the short term here for this. And I hope that it serves to show that in fact we can do good things with vaccine therapies.
I would give a list of 6 things that we're actually doing right now because of COVID, which we will continue. One is telemedicine, much more telemedicine. One is less hospitalization. People are avoiding the hospital, and more care at home. One is a reduction in unnecessary tests. A large number of the tests we do, for example, we might do a CT scan and an MRI when a patient has a headache. We only need to do one of those things and capture 99.9% of the problem. So we're going to reduce unnecessary tests. We're going to have less elective procedures, or they will be delayed longer. We will have more physical therapy and less surgery, and we will have more medical solutions as opposed to surgical solutions. All of these things are starting to happen because of COVID, and there's momentum in that direction, and there's even reimbursements in that direction. So I think we're going to see a big change in the healthcare system as we go forward.
Yeah, I would just add that one thing I've seen happening, and I hope continues on, is how researchers have behaved. And I've seen researchers really step up and recognize the need that is there presented to us and apply their skills to this need, dropping pretty much everything else, not sleeping. And also, most importantly, I think being very open with collaborating, data sharing, knowledge sharing, and that sort of thing, which is not really what comes naturally to researchers. So I've been very pleased to see that researchers are sort of willing to put their own needs aside when there's this vast need for moving quickly together.